The federal government's decision to stop requiring people to fill out the long-form census and make it voluntary is stirring up complaints from StatsCan, which warns the change could lead to laws based on inaccurate data, to some members of the Conservative Party who worry some Canadians will be left underrepresented. To explain the government's reasoning, we're joined from London by the Minister responsible, Industry Minister Tony Clement. Minister Clement, thanks for speaking with us. How does the government typically use information from the long census?
Well, the long-form census is used by all sorts of institutions. It's used by governments. It's used by private businesses. It's used by private institutions like NGOs and so forth. So there's no question that the data is something that is quite valued and is used. What we're trying to do is to make sure that the data is still available to those who want it, but we also take time to consider that there are some people in the country who feel that this is an unwarranted intrusion into their private lives, and that the threat of fines or jail time is just not appropriate in order to get that data. So that's the balancing act that we're seeking to promote for next year's census.
An article in this morning's Globe and Mail says officials within StatsCan say you have misrepresented the advice, the warnings that they've given you against changing census compliance. Do you think you've misrepresented what they told you?
Not at all. In fact, their role is to provide advice to government, which they did do in this case, and certainly we had a dialogue with them on if we wanted to take consideration of those Canadians who feel that it is far too intrusive to get this information from them on threat of jail time or fines. If we want to balance that off and give people a choice in the matter, how best to implement the questions, and we did take their advice. We took their advice to increase the sample size to 33% of the population, and to have an advocacy advertising campaign associated with it. So, no, I think I've been perfectly consistent with the advice that was offered by StatsCan, and I'm not saying that there are some Canadians who like the idea that government can come along and force people to fill out forms, but that isn't what we feel when it comes to the long-form census.
I think a lot of people share your view. However, Don Drummond, retired chief economist for TD Bank, he's a member of StatsCan's advisory council. He's quoted as saying he was shocked by the news the mandatory long-form census was being abandoned. A letter sent to you and your office Monday containing the signatures of 24 leaders and former leaders of business and public service. They urged you to keep the long-form census mandatory. Even one current member of the federal Conservatives from Edmonton, I believe, has urged you to keep the long-form census mandatory. Why has the government decided to push ahead with voluntary compliance, filling out this long-form census, when there's so much opposition?
Sure. No, the Edmonton MP, just to be clear, was just merely passing along some concerns from his constituents. He wasn't advocating that position necessarily. But to the other people that you mentioned, these are people who work for banks, work for businesses, or work for public institutions who definitely value having the data that is mined from the long-form census. But the fact of the matter is, those people have a point of view. I acknowledge that. But we're also trying to represent Canadians. There are Canadians who genuinely feel that intruding into how many bedrooms they have at home and how they get to work or how long it takes or whether they have a mental or physical incapacity or whether their children do, these are very personal questions. And there are some, not all, who conscientiously object to that. And we as a government want to balance off their rights and their concerns with this demand for data.
Industry Minister Tony Clement speaking with us from London. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.